All right, here we go. We figure we finally give this a shot. You got CeeLo, Chris Lopresti, honored to be joined by the great Boomer Esiason here to do a little Rangers season wrap-up, a little first foray into maybe a Rangers podcast. Full disclosure, we're recording this as Rangers breakup day is going on at their training center after a very disappointing season. I would say let's begin with the most recent news expected. Of course, head coach Peter Laviolette being fired over the weekend.
CeeLo, great to do this with you. And as a New York Ranger fan, like I know you are and how passionate you are, much like myself, I think we both felt like Peter Laviolette should have been fired. I felt like he checked out halfway through the season. And then you hear some of the stories about him not going into a locker room after the game. And I think that's the way most NHL coaches handle things. It's not the way that NFL football coaches do their thing. It's just a little bit different kind of protocol. But for me, I just didn't see a guy engaged on the bench. And that's the thing that troubled me about it, especially when you think about how many good players are on this team and had career years last year that unfortunately did not live up to that. And then I worry about the development of young players like Keandre Miller and, of course, Alexei Lafreniere, and how they, in my eyes anyway, took a step back.
A lot of guys took a step back, and totally agree with you, especially down the stretch where even though they were still in that wild card race, it just didn't feel like the guys were engaged from the coach on down, from the performances out on the ice. But the thing to me with Laviolette all season long where it seemed like a stubbornness came into play, this man-to-man defensive system that they insisted on playing, and you had guys, even Adam Fox late in the season, talking about confusion out on the ice, and then there was the head coach a couple minutes later at his press conference saying there was no confusion, there were just breakdowns in coverage. So there did seem to be a disconnect between coach and players.
All right, so I think the confusion started on June 2nd. Last year. And the reason I say that is because they lost 3 straight to the Florida Panthers. They were all tight games. They had 3 overtime games in that series. It was a knockdown, drag-out fight. And the reason that confusion started is because I believe that Chris Drury and Ranger management really reacted to the fan base's disdain with one player, and that player was Jacob Trouba, the captain. The captain who was playing with a broken foot, a captain who is the only guy on the team that really threw his body around when he really needed to do. And I know that there was frustration with him, and it looked like he was slow against the Florida Panthers. And now you have this awkward situation developing with your captain, and it is out there in the open, and it got ugly. I don't think that Chris Drury managed that one correctly. And this comes on top of the fact that he's going to basically threaten Barclay Goodrow.
Yeah.
And these guys sign contracts to come to the Rangers as free agents because everybody wants to play for the Rangers. That's the reputation that they have had. And now you have 2 players, Jacob Trouba and Barclay Goodrow, that came here, wanted to come here, signed contracts to come here, and now are being threatened with trades. And they have no movement clauses or no trade clauses within their contracts. And it doesn't seem like the other side is honoring that.
Right, and respected veterans in the room, obviously, have been around a while, and they have the respect of their teammates, and there's a leadership aspect to it as well. You know, the Trouba situation, once he made his leverage move to essentially block the offseason trade that they had set up, it just created an awkward dynamic from the start of the season. Even when they got out of the gate and went in some games, it almost felt like some of that was a little empty and misleading if you watched them on a night-in, night-out basis. And he didn't seem as engaged. The team didn't seem as engaged. There just seemed to be a complete disconnect. My biggest issue, though, we can point blame. We could talk about Drury. We could talk about Laviolette. Ultimately, at some point, and you can speak to this better than I can as a former professional athlete, at some point, the players have to get over it, right? And it seemed like a lot of the guys from all the way to when the Trouba trade went down or even before it went down, Chris Kreider being put in that memo that went around to the league, even after they got rid of some guys on the fly, they never seemed to get back to where they were a year ago. And a lot of guys, quite honestly, looked disinterested and unengaged out on the ice all the way until the very last game of the season.
All right, so you had this cascading of events happening. And in the meantime, in the back of their minds, they have to sign Igor Shesterkin to a long-term contract. So they're playing within the cap space, and they're trying to figure out who's worth the money, who's not worth the money, who are we going to upset, who are we going to insult. You know, we often talk about hockey culture, and hockey culture takes care of themselves. I mean, it is a closed league. We see a lot of guys being rehired, fired, both at the GM and at the coaching level. And there is a respect within the league. And you don't treat your captain the way that Jacob Trouba was treated. I'm sorry, you just don't. Whether I wanted him here or not, you don't treat him that way. And you don't let it get out into the public domain. And Chris Drury allowed that to happen. And I know that it gets amplified by an angry fan base. And the angry fan base had every right to be angry, I think, this year, but not last year. I mean, last year they played their ass off. They were President's Trophy winners. They had one of the best power plays in hockey, one of the best penalty kills in hockey. And they're doing it really without the Nathan McKinnons of the world or the Connor McDavids of the world or anybody of that ilk. Now, I know Panarin is a superstar, but he is not a centerman. He is not a driver to the net. He's an East-West player. Meek is more of a driver to the net when he's at the top of his game, and he used to be a 200-foot player, but for whatever reason, something happened within that locker room. And it all started, I believe, with the Trouba rumors that came out after that series was over with the Florida Panthers, and then the Goodrow thing that happened, and then we have this Artemi Panarin sexual harassment thing that nobody had heard of until the last 2 games of the regular season. So I don't know how that impacted his play for a portion of the season.
It's funny, his numbers from last year were down, but still a productive player. And down the stretch, when a lot of guys weren't able to kick it into another gear, he was. I thought he was one of their more productive, more noticeable players, especially with the puck on his stick. We know he's great that way. You bring up the allegation story. Now, I didn't know specifically the Panarin part of it, but there had been some reporting in general terms about stuff that was going on behind the scenes, disconnect between management and the players, social media team being told to keep clear of the players, some things that had gone on behind closed doors. And it seemed like that was sort of the underbelly of what bled out onto the ice, where we're looking at this team and just wondering what happened to the passion, the comeback ability. They didn't come back and win a game, and they were down 2 goals until the last couple games of the season. They didn't win 3 games in a row since mid-November. So I just wonder how much of the off-ice stuff from Chris Drury on down, Panarin, what went on with Chris Kreider with being put in the memo, and the fact that he seems like he's headed for divorce with the organization. There is a big mess, whether it's Chris Drury or someone else, because I know he hasn't been let go, but who knows what happens over the next couple of days.
He's not going to get let go.
Okay.
He's going to get his chance to hire a third coach
Which
now,
is wild.
Which is really wild when you think about it. But as I look back over the season and I think about the different players that really disappointed,
a long list.
All of us. It is a long list, and it starts with Mika, because Mika's that was a great trade. One of the great trades in the history of the Rangers was bringing him to the New York Rangers, and he has been one of our most productive players. Plays in every situation, was and has been a 200-foot player. I don't know if he was dealing with injury. I don't know. He had a kid over last year.
He has a young daughter.
He has another thing he loves to do his
DJ stuff. I feel like that got overblown a little bit in the off season.
But I think it's also they had 3 really long seasons.
Yeah.
And last year took a lot out of them. And unlike the year before when they got embarrassed by the Devils in the playoffs, they came back and they actually won the President's Trophy.
Yeah.
So it showed you that they were engaged for last year or 2 years ago. Last year, like I said, this cavalcade of events that took place in the offseason, basically, I felt like torpedoed the season before it even started. And I remember they got out to a 12-4 start. That was because of the 2 goaltenders.
Yeah.
The 2 goaltenders were out of their minds. And I really worried out loud, I don't know how many times, 20, 30 times, about the lack of defense in front of either goalie when they were playing. And too many point-blank shots and just not enough physicality, because at that point, Jacob Trouba is now going to be gone. And Ryan Lindgren's going to be gone.
Yeah.
And who is the physical person on the back end now?
Yeah, I mean, I think Braden Schneider has some capabilities in his game that way, but he hasn't really taken the next step. Keandre Miller, who I can't believe I'm still not ready to give up on him despite turnover after turnover, lazy play after lazy play.
A frustrating enigma.
Yeah,
I think
and he's due for a contract soon.
It's not really lazy play. I think what I see here is a player who is so physically gifted, who's still, believe it or not, trying to figure out the whole machination of moving from wing to defense.
Yeah.
It takes a while. And then could you imagine, let's say they decide to get rid of him, and he's playing out in the West Coast somewhere, and he turns into an all-star.
That's the fear.
That's the thing they're worried about, because he is so physically gifted.
And then they remake the defense on the fly. Will Borgen comes in. He was solid. I felt like that even started to kind of fall off towards the end of the season. Euro Vaakanainen's a third pair guy. Carson Soucy looked completely overmatched in this man-to-man system that they have. So that's where, you got to look towards the next coach. What kind of defensive system is he going to bring in? It cannot be anything close to what they did this year because their personnel simply could not keep up in their own end.
Right. So I just, going back to my disappointments on the year, I would say Mika Zibanejad was number one. For me, number two was Adam Fox. For number three would be, I would have to say Chris Kreider, just simply because he did not put up the numbers that we're used to seeing.
Numbers cratered.
And he was dealing with the back issue.
Yeah.
Look, by the way, I don't want him traded. I want him to stay here. I'd like to see him be a 15-year New York Ranger, which means he would fulfill the last 2 years of his contract. But again, in a cap sport, in moving pieces around and trying to get rid of people, sometimes you have to make sacrifices. And these are the things that Chris Drury is dealing with. And the internal part of it that we don't hear as fans. Yeah. And then when you tell me the social media team is supposed to be, away from the players, I mean, now all of a sudden.
Well, that was based on what happened between Panarin and this now former employee.
But now you know that there's something underneath that Drury was dealing with that we didn't know about.
Now, you bring up Kreider, and I agree with you in a perfect way. I mean, we're less than a year removed from that third period hat trick in Raleigh. It feels like a long time ago, but really that's the reality. We're not there yet, and it was a completely different year for him. So whether it's the back issues, it's his contract, whatever, I wonder if Chris Drury is remaining, which you very much feel he is can that relationship be salvaged? Because Kreider, to me, at times, having nothing to do with his teammates, he seems like he's tight with his group. He loves Mika. You see him out with Rempe, high fives on the ice, all that. I just wonder where his feelings are with the organization and management and where they are with him to include him in that memo along with Jacob Trouba back very early in the season.
Well, I think, those memos happen quite a bit around the league. You'd be surprised.
Not publicized as much the way it was,
but
though.
They're out there.
Yeah.
And, believe you me, anytime somebody can take a shot at the Rangers, once they get information like this, they're going to do it. And that also sends a wedge right through the middle of the team. I thought the addition of JT Miller was a good trade.
And that should help moving forward
and that
as well.
should help moving forward. And that was a good trade. And it also brought out a better Mika Zibanejad.
Yes. On the wing, though, if you notice, more so on the wing.
So maybe that's where he belongs.
Then they need some help at center.
Of course they do. And maybe that's where, if they decide that they're going to move away from Chris Kreider, then that's where money can be spent. But the other guy that really, really disappointed me this year was Vincent Trocheck.
That's where I was headed next.
Because he was the guy that we got because we wanted the edge. We wanted that Carolina feel to our hockey team, and that's what he was supposed to bring to our hockey team. And we saw that last year during the President's Trophy run and this magical run with Lafreniere and Panarin. Mm-hmm. And I just really felt like, for some reason, Lafreniere, Panarin, and Trocheck fell off the face of the earth. 5-on-5.
Especially early on, yeah.
They were great last year at 5-on-5. This past season, not so much. And Lafreniere, after he signs his contract, and everybody who is a Ranger fan knows this, he basically disappeared.
Yep.
And, I mean, it's ice capades out there. Son, you were a number one overall draft pick. John Tavares, number one overall draft pick. Sidney Crosby, number one overall draft pick. Mm-hmm. Connor McDavid, number one overall draft pick. This is who people thought you were supposed to be.
Yeah, Jack Hughes when healthy.
Right, he's not even close to being that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we thought at the beginning of the year that there was something there because he got off to a pretty hot start. They signed him to the contract, and then all of a sudden disappeared. And now you have to wonder about caring about your job, caring about your business, doing what you're supposed to do as a professional hockey player. And to me, it sounds like he felt or acted like he made it because he got his contract.
Let's hope that's not the case. He seems like the kind of guy who he's just kind of like very mellow and chill, and they like him in the locker room, but he's got to find that next gear and that edge. So that's the part that he's got to focus on moving forward. You bring up Trocheck. Beyond the production on the ice, when they traded Trouba, I felt like he stepped up, even though he wasn't wearing a letter, and kind of became the voice in the locker room. And I'm thinking, okay, this guy, he's going to be the next captain. But, man, his play fell off so much, not even the offensive production, but so many times coming back down the ice, not back-checking, being late to pick up his man, making mistakes, turnovers. Like, I know he got banged up in the Four Nations and maybe broke a thumb or something. We'll find out about that at the breakup day. But I had such bigger expectations for him, especially than when they made the JT Miller trade. And all of a sudden, here comes his best friend, and you're thinking, okay, this is the new path forward. These childhood buddies who are still super tight, and they're going to be the leadership group going forward. Maybe they will be, but it didn't play out that way down the stretch.
Maybe they will be. They're going to have to be.
Yeah.
They will be the leadership structure moving forward, and they'll move away from some of these guys. But a couple of these guys, like to me, Carson Soucy was a disaster here. And I'm thinking that JT Miller told his buddy Carson, yeah, you got to come here. This is going to be great for you. And then he comes here, and then he doesn't fit the system. So he may fit whoever system is going to be here next year. So I don't want to dump on him just yet. Trying to figure it out in the last 20 games is almost impossible, especially if you're on a team that's not going to the playoffs.
And that's where I understood. I don't know how much you followed. And you've been sick the last week or so. Have you followed any of the Calvin DeHaan stuff?
He's very upset.
And I don't blame him. Respected veteran. He came in, played a few games. They were winning. He looked smooth and comfortable out there in the system, and then couldn't sniff the ice. And he sees a guy like Soucy come in who's swimming in and it's got no idea what's going on. So that's where the communication, whether it was upper management, Laviolette, combination of the two, so many things out of whack. But whether it's Soucy, whether it's a guy like Vakanainen, you brought up Fox as well. I feel like when Lindgren cratered and then ultimately got traded, Fox missed some time. He's an offensive defenseman. He's not a great skater. He's not Cale Makar. So the idea that you have this defense core where none of them are really gifted skaters outside of Keandre Miller, they played this man-to-man system where they're all running around in the zone. They need some structure and a guy to come in and let's keep these guys, let's guard the front of the net a little bit better because they were so disastrous.
A little bit better?
Right. Well, we got to start somewhere.
But that also happens to be forwards have to get back.
Sure, they play a factor as well.
And normally when I see the middle of the ice wide open, I want to know where my center is.
Yeah.
Is he at the red line or is he down below the dots? Mm-hmm. And that centerman is like key to the front of that net. And, you got to read off of each other. And with all the change that happened in the last 20 games of the season, you're going to have a lot of mistakes. You're going to have a lot of guys that still haven't figured it out. And that's one of the parts of the problems that I had with Peter Laviolette, because after one of the games, he basically let it out. We're missing assignments. We're not attending to what we're supposed to be attending to. And I'm like, all right, well, you're the coaching staff.
And that's when you knew he was a dead man walking.
I knew it
there.
right that day that he was done, because sometimes you're honest, and your honesty will lead to an eye-opening with the owner, Jim Dolan, who's not happy. When his team does not make the playoffs, he is not happy because that's where they make all their money. And nobody makes more money. Well, maybe Toronto does.
Yeah.
But nobody makes more money down here in the States than the New York Rangers do when they are in the playoffs.
And that's where I wondered about Drury, because all you hear is he's fine and there's a good relationship there. The one thing I did read over the weekend that Dolan was considering sitting in on the player exit interview meetings today, this Monday.
Good.
I just wonder if something is said or delivered to him in that meeting that changes, in those meetings that changes.
Yeah, I would not listen to the players too much.
They've done it before. They got Gerard Gallant fired.
Yeah, I know they did. I know. And for whatever reason, sooner or later, these guys have got to step up.
They got to sack up,
guys, look, let's face it. They traded Lindgren. They traded Kakko. They traded Hedel.
Trouba.
They traded Trouba.
Gaudreau in the offseason.
Right,
Gaudreau.
So there were a lot of guys that were off that President's team that now are no longer here. And the reason they're no longer here is because of two things. One was because of the contract for Igor Shesterkin. They had to clear money for him. And the second one was because of, I think, of what happened on June 2nd and the Ranger fan base just going after Jacob Trouba left and right. I mean, do we forget about the night that he took his helmet off and he threw it up against the boards
turned
and
turned
the season around? I mean, there are a lot of things that you do as a captain that people don't see, but he was a captain who I thought on the ice laid his shoulder into the opposing team's best player when we needed it most. And sometimes we forget that because we get caught up in the fact that he made a couple bad plays or a few bad plays or had a bad series against the Florida Panthers, who were the eventual Stanley Cup champions.
Yeah. And he, like you referenced, he was coming back from injury, wasn't 100%, and it definitely affected him, and it was obvious to those of us watching. I liked a lot of his game, but the contract that they gave him in today's NHL, if you're going to be an $8.5 million defenseman and not produce much offensively, it's very difficult, especially when you have
who's
other...
giving these contracts?
Chris Drury.
All right, so do we trust him to give more contracts? Do we trust him to make more trades?
I think that's where the questions about his job status are fair, regardless of what his relationship with the owner is.
I just thought that this is why I question what he has done.
Yeah.
because I know he was in the front office, so he had been around the Rangers, so he knew exactly what was going on internally. He knew about all the players. He knew when Jeff Gorton was making moves and things of that nature. I felt that like he was kind of a spy for Glenn Sather. That's what I always felt like he was internally. And maybe that's one of the reasons why those guys got blown out and he got handed the keys. And you got to give him credit. He did get the team to a President's Trophy.
Yeah. I mean, look, they've been
They've
in the outside of this
straight
they've been
unbelievable
there.
years,
They've been
except for the debacle against
series,
the Devils.
Yeah. One last thing before we close it up here, and there's so much you could spend days and days analyzing this team in this season. So when you've got these high-priced guys that aren't producing, or you're not going to rebuild but you're going to retool, you need the young, cheap players to come in and produce, right?
That's
the young
exactly
guys.
right.
And
yes.
this is an organization that has really struggled with that. We touched on Alexei Lafreniere already. Go ahead, and then
all right. So I was just going to say, they allowed Zach Jones to play here towards the end of the year because they wanted to watch him more. They brought up Robertson to give him a chance to
games,
play.
finally.
Couple games.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen Matt Rempe. The Edstrom injury, I think, really hurt us. A lot of people don't talk about him.
He's a useful bottom six player.
I thought Matt Rempe actually has now played himself into a legitimate hockey player.
Okay. He's improving. I see signs of it. Yeah.
I'm not telling you he's going to be a 50-goal scorer.
No.
But I'm telling you what he is going to be is an effective pain in the ass against the other team. And a couple of those late games where he played and he was standing in front of the net and able to manipulate his big body and stick around and knock the puck into the net, to me tells me all I need to know. The kid can play. He's just got to be smart, not take stupid penalties, and you still got to have a guy on your team that is willing to lay it on the line when somebody else is getting beat up that shouldn't be getting beat up.
I'm good with, we talk Edstrom and Rempe, bottom six role players, cheap, not going to score a ton of goals, but they add value to your team. Where my concern comes in with the Rangers is they always have to go to trade or free agency to bring in the guy that can score. Now, two guys that are supposed to be skill guys that we did see, not a ton of, but a little bit. Brennan Othman finally got a bit of an extended run, and Gabe Perreault comes out of college. They blow up the first year of the entry level to give him a couple of games. Laviolette ends up healthy scratching him for a few games. And you combine those two, Othman and Perreault, both first-round picks, supposed to be more skill guys. They played 27 games combined. 0 goals, 2 assists.
Yeah, I don't know, but it
That's
depends.
a problem.
But it also depends on who they're playing with. Now I know they tried Perreault with top end guys. JT
briefly,
Miller was
they didn't
out
give him
there.
much of a chance,
and he doesn't get any power play time whatsoever. And that's what happened with Hedl. That's what happened with Kakko. They never got power play time.
And Lafreniere up until kind of just second unit, even still not a ton.
Right. So
he did more of his damage last year at 5-on-5 in that line, like you said.
Which is something that you could appreciate. But what people don't understand is if guys don't get power play time, they're not going to get a lot of goals.
Sure.
And if you have a top-end power play like the Rangers had going into the season that ended up faltering and ended up being one of the biggest enigmas in the NHL. How the same group of guys that were so good last year, how does this happen to them this year?
Yeah.
Right, they couldn't buy one. Well, I mean, if you don't want the young guys on the ice for power play time, they're not going to score goals. It's hard to score goals in the NHL 5-on-5. So that's why Kakko and Hedl and those guys, they never really truly got a chance, and they never found their way here because there were superstars in front of them. So now the Rangers are in a real conundrum. Who do they keep? Who do they get rid of? And who are they setting their sights on in terms of free agency?
And the coach, because that's got to thread the needle where you've got high-priced veteran guys with a lot of experience who need to be respected but also pushed. But the young guys also, you need someone who can give the young player a chance to establish a role.
As much as I am, and we'll leave it at this, as much as I am a John Tortorella fan, not now.
No,
We're not going down that road again. I'm not, I don't know who's going to shake loose. There could be other coaches that could be fired, that could be a perfect fit here. Like Sullivan could be a perfect fit here if Pittsburgh wants to move on from him, Mike Sullivan. But I'm a big Joe Quenneville guy.
That's who I want.
And, and I know there was this thing around him in Chicago. Yeah. He was a coach trying to coach a hockey team.
He's been reinstated by the league.
And I am not getting into all the stuff that whole thing entailed. But how the coach is supposed to handle that, I have no idea. But all I can tell you is that he might be the right guy for the right time. And then it comes down to identifying the guys that you can move, get something in return for, and then finding those right guys that are going to fill in the holes so this team can return to where it was last year. It's not that far removed.
Right.
I still think Mika's going to be here. I think Keandre Miller is going to be here. and I think Kreider is going to be here. I think those 3 guys are going to be here.
Panarin as well. 1 year left.
Yep. Trocheck's not going anywhere. And if Panarin could be a trade chip if they need one, come next year's,
got to waive
playoffs.
Full no trade, though.
Yeah.
He has some control there, as a lot of these guys do. Mika as well.
But he's going to want to go somewhere if he can go and win a championship. If it's not here,
right,
he'd love to do it there. So these are a lot of the decisions that Chris Drury is going to have to make. And I often say this, the GM has got to be ruthless. Now
he has been.
He has been, but it also has to be like a controlled ruthlessness.
And smart ruthlessness.
Right. And I think the Borgen thing, you're getting what Trouba gave you, but you're getting half the money.
That extension looks better knowing that the salary cap's going up.
Exactly. We're going to maybe try to do this a couple more times.
Good, yeah.
During this offseason, see what happens, see what we can come up with, and hopefully the Rangers are going to make some of the right decisions so we can get back in the playoffs again next year.
Well, I'm glad you tapped me on the shoulder today and said, hey, let's bang this out. So first of hopefully many of them. We'll close with this. Adam Fox had the first word at breakup day today. So before I came in here, I saw this quote. Everyone has to really look in the mirror. This year was unrecognizable from the team that made the conference finals 2 of the past 3 years. So there's one of your building block guys, hand up accountability, as you like to say, and hopefully he can take over and be more of a leader moving forward.
You know what? Get in the weight room.
That would help.
And stop getting pushed around and getting pushed off the puck.
And do some skating work this offseason as well. All right, Boomer, it was fun. Appreciate it.